Welcome to the Australian Hiker Podcast, Australia's longest running hiking podcast, downloaded over 1.3 million times worldwide and providing you with an Australian perspective on all things hiking. Coming to you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country.
In this week's episode 350 of the Australian Hiker Podcast, we find out all about the Portuguese Coastal Way. We hope you enjoy. If you'd like to help support Australian Hiker and this podcast, there are a couple of ways that you can help us out. Firstly, by subscribing on your podcast host of choice so that each episode is available as soon as it's published. And if you have the opportunity, leave us a 5-star review. Another way to support us is go to the Australian Hiker website at www.australianhiker.com.au and click on the supporters page and buy us a coffee. You can do a one-off donation or become a monthly supporter. All donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue producing this podcast and blog. Now let's get on to today's episode. The Portuguese Camino spans 625 kilometres from Lisbon in Portugal to Santiago in Spain. But rather than doing the full walk, many people opt for the shorter, and I do say shorter, 260-kilometre Portuguese Coastal Way, running between Porto and Santiago, which takes most people around 12 to 14 days. In this podcast episode, we catch up with Canberra-based hiker Mary Wiley-Smith, who late last year undertook her own adventure on the Portuguese Coastal Way. Mary, thanks for taking the time to chat with us on your Camino adventure.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
So before we talk about your trip, tell us a bit about yourself and why you decided to do this trip.
Yeah, thanks very much. So I recently retired from the public service after about 35 years, and so did a few of my friends. And so we actually got together and we're talking about what we'd like to do next and what our interests were. And a lot of our interests combine, and so it was kind of like walking, history, travel, good food, and we were talking about how we can celebrate our retirement. And so we thought that we should do something, and one of our friends, whose name's Jo, had just recently completed this walk. So she shared her experience and was quite excited by it and really enjoyed it. Once we looked into it, we actually thought it's probably the best thing for us to kind of do and enjoy. And we'd also learn a lot about Portugal and Spain. Okay. So that's why. In terms of the first part of what you asked about me and my background, so I've lived in Canberra kind of region all my life, New South Wales, Canberra. And I've done a lot of walks in that region and a lot of walks around the South Coast and in Sydney. I always love walking. I walk every day. We've got a dog, and so my husband and I always are kind of up and about, keen walkers. Now that I've retired, it's wonderful to be able to spend a bit more time doing that. And so this was an opportunity to do that.
And is this the longest walk you've ever done?
Yes, by far. I usually only do walks that are about 2 to 3 hours, and this was 20 kilometres kind of average every day. So you're looking at, 6 to 7 hours on your feet.
Yeah, no, it's certainly a bit of a culture shock when you do that for the first time. Now, can you provide us a bit of an overview of the trail itself?
The trail was, so it's advertised at about 260, as you said in the intro. What we found is that there's a number of trails, and so we suspect that we actually did a little bit more than that, probably about 280 kilometres. And the reason was that every day, particularly in the early part of the walk, we had a choice when we were in Portugal and we were going up the coastal part of Portugal. We could do the seashore path, which was right on the water, or we could do what they called the coastal way, which was just a little bit slightly inland. You could still see the sea and still see the Atlantic, but you were kind of like a little bit higher up in the hills. And so we had a choice every day of which one we'd do. Most of the time we actually took the water, and so we walked a little bit further because you're going around all the headlands and weaving around the coast. So that was the distance. Partly we were really interested in this walk because of the variation of the trail. And so we had a lot of boardwalks, sands and dunes and beaches, and also some farmland tracks on the seashore path in particular, and so that was in the early days in Portugal. And then if we went onto the coastal way, and sometimes these two walking paths converged, you were on more cobblestone paths, woodland tracks, and kind of old Roman roads, which was really interesting. Once we got into Spain, eventually kind of a lot of the paths started to merge, including with other paths like the Central Way coming from Porto up to Santiago, but we all kind of like ended up together. And there was much more undulating hills, rocky paths going through villages and vineyards, and quite a bit of steep climbs in some places, and sometimes quite rocky. We were walking over boulders at one point as we were kind of heading upwards, and at that point it's quite busy, and so you're also kind of navigating to make sure that you're not bumping with other people and walking poles, and eventually on your way into Santiago you have to also kind of deal with a lot of bikes that are coming past, but that's half the fun of it.
So how many people were travelling as part of your group?
So we started when we were thinking of booking with 3 of us. So there was Kylie, Michelle and myself. And in the end, Michelle had to pull out. So it was just Kylie and I. So it was just the 2 of us, and it worked out pretty well. I had a lot of walking to do before we went. And so we booked about 12 months out just to make sure that we get the accommodation, because part of the challenge in that part of the world is it does get very busy, particularly as you're getting towards Santiago. So we did that, and we knew that we had a goal and that we're going to have to be able to walk 20 kilometres for a few days in a row. And so I had a good time in walking around Canberra and the coast and getting those kilometres up, and also preparing for being able to walk on rocky paths and uneven ground.
It always amazes me when I've had a few people talk about some of the Caminos over the last couple of years, and it's always you're mentioning the Roman roads, and you think about 2,000 years ago these roads were put in, and they're still working quite well. So.
Yeah, part of the challenge, and something I didn't expect, that you think cobblestone roads and old roads that they're probably quite smooth by now, but some of them were actually quite sharp. So you had to kind of walk on quite uneven ground, and it was quite uncomfortable after about 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah. Now, what time of the year was your trip, and why did you pick the time that you actually went?
So we decided to not go in the peak season and just avoid as many people as we can. I had a few friends that have done some of the other Caminos, including the ones through France, and it sounds like it's quite busy, and so we thought that we'd avoid that and do autumn. So we went late September, early October, still beautiful weather, so it was about 20, 26 degrees on most days, and there wasn't as many people around. And also that attracted us to actually doing this particular walk, because it's one of the quieter Caminos. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I mean, you did mention that you ended up in Santiago, and we'll talk about that a bit more in a little while, but I'm guessing there would have been a period where you hit the peak bubble.
Yes, we actually got to a point where we were very sad and kind of longing for the quietness of the Portuguese coast.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Was this an organised trip? Did you have a company that arranged it for you, or did you do all the organisation yourself?
So we decided to go with a company, partly because our friend Jo that had done it the year before went with a company, and we went with the same one that she did, which was Raw Travel out of Melbourne. I thought it's an Australian company. They've got people posted overseas, and once we actually had a look at what the offering was on the website, we decided to go with them. But there are lots of companies that are doing this at the moment, and we went for 20 days with them. So the itinerary was 20 days. The walk itself was 13 days that we wanted, but lots of flexibility with them on what we could arrange, how many days that we could stay in each place, and so we can get some sightseeing in as well.
Yeah, that's always a good way to do it, rather than saying, right, I'm going to walk for 12, 14, 15 days and that's it. Having days off just to do nothing or have a bit of a rest, or as you say, if this is the longest walk you've ever done, sometimes you don't know how you're going to go, and it's good to give your feet a bit of a rest every so often.
Yeah, and the sightseeing, it would have been very sad to walk through these beautiful towns and kind of fishing villages, and they're just ancient, and to kind of just walk through them, sleep there and then keep walking. We had fantastic opportunity. We stopped in 3 places just to, enjoy, look around, see how people live, and walking was a wonderful way to do that. You really kind of take time and get to know what a place is like before you kind of move on.
Now, were those rest days, were they recommended by the travel company, or you had towns you particularly wanted to stop at?
A bit of both. So in their normal itinerary, which is 18 days, they have a couple of days at the beginning and one at the end in Santiago. So you spend a couple of days in Porto before you start, one in Santiago when you finish, and they had a kind of a rest day or a day off in, I think it's called Bayona, which is kind of halfway. We decided that we wanted to have a bit more time in Santiago at the end, so we popped in an extra day. And there were also a couple of other places that looked interesting to us. And when we talked to the travel company, they confirmed that they were very great places to stay and explore. So we did that. And we also combined the normal last 2 days of walking. So normally in their normal kind of itinerary, I think there might be 14 days walking. We did 13 days because the last day was like 7 or 9 kilometres. So it was just easier to just get the whole last day done.
No, that's fair enough. So you did 20 days, 19 nights. What was the length of the day? So I mean, I know it's going to vary from day to day, but typically, what time did you start walking, and what time did you finish on an average?
So yes, the average was 20 kilometres. Shortest was 13. Longest was probably close to 30.
Yep.
So average day was we'd get up at about 7:15, pack everything up. We had to have our bags because we had porters taking our bags from one accommodation to the next, so we didn't have to carry it ourselves. So that had to be down in reception by 8 o'clock, so that's when we had breakfast, and then we would grab our day packs and get on the road by then and start the walk. We always stopped wherever we saw a cafe because one piece of advice from Joe is that you just never know when the next one is, and a lot of the time, you see on a map that there might be something coming up in an hour or two, but you get there and it's closed. So we always took we were always pretty flexible on our stops just to actually take advantage of whatever was open. And we also kind of carried whatever food we needed just in case there wasn't anything. In terms of what happened towards the end of the day, we'd normally kind of get there anytime between kind of 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So we were able to check in and just rest because being both Portugal and Spain, dinner time is a lot later than what we normally have. So it's 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. So we'd rest during that period and then go to dinner. And by the time you finish dinner, it's 11 o'clock. By the time you get ready for bed, it's midnight. And then you'd start the whole thing again.
I was going to say, something I hadn't really thought about before. Do both Spain and Portugal have the siesta period, and everything just shuts down for a period of time?
So they both have it, and sometimes in the larger cities they don't shut, and so it just depends. But you just have to come prepared for things not being open during the siesta period, including booking in to accommodation. We were lucky because this trip was part of a kind of a month trip to Spain and Portugal, so we got time to kind of adjust before we actually started. But I think just, those late dinners, if you're not used to it, it's quite hard because you're going to bed and you're exhausted, but you've got a full stomach.
Yeah, I was going to say, particularly in my case, I went to a boarding school as a child and I was used to having dinner by 6:30. I don't know if I'd cope at having dinner at that late.
I'm amazed I coped. I like my dinner at 6:30 as well. And the other thing I should say too is when we got into Spain, the mornings were dark. And so even on our last morning, we got up and went early because we knew we had a very long day, and we were walking in the dark for close to 45 minutes. And it was beautiful because then you're kind of watching the dawn, but that's a strange feeling.
Yeah. I hadn't really thought about that. Or you just tend to think, okay, Spain's a sunny sort of place, so you expect it to be sunny for quite a long time, but I suppose that really depends on the time of the year. So.
Sure does, yeah.
Now, from a logistics perspective, you started the trip at Porto?
Yes, and sorry, I should have probably started with that. Yes, so started at Porto, and we walked up the coast of Portugal and then crossed the river into Spain.
And how did you actually get to Porto? Is it something that's you fly into Lisbon and get a bus to Porto, or is it an easy process?
Yeah, it's a pretty easy process. So we started at Porto, but the actual trailhead, everyone's told to start a little bit out of Porto, which is a place called Matinos, and you can get to it by train or by bus, and we chose train, and it was quite easy. There are a lot of good trains and buses in that kind of region, and very regular. So it was easy to get to the trailhead.
And that raises a question: do you speak Spanish or Portuguese, or do the locals speak reasonably good English?
So the locals in Portugal speak reasonably good English, and so we were quite surprised by that. And so it's kind of almost like their second language, and it was easy to get by. Not so much in Spain, but you can still get by. You've got to thank Google and your iPhones for being able to translate, and they're used to that as well. But the first part of it was just very easy. So as I said, getting to the trailhead, getting around Porto. We went to Lisbon and we got a bus to Porto. You can also get a train. And then we did, when we finished in Santiago, it was very easy just to jump on a bus and get all the way back down to Lisbon to fly out.
Did you need to actually book that, or they just had that many trips running? You could just go to the pickup point and just go.
We actually did book ahead for a lot of our buses because we just didn't know. But I would say that you probably could jump on one if it wasn't peak season. We heard a few nightmares about peak season and getting stuck in Santiago and not being able to get out by plane, bus or train.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, Santiago is pretty much the ending for most of these Caminos. So it's sort of, as you say, peak season. As you say, you might be there for a few days and you weren't planning on. Now, as a generalisation, what was the vegetation profile like? Because I mean, I suppose I've got. I don't know about Portugal, but I have a picture in my mind about what Spain looks like, but that could be totally wrong. So, describe the vegetation along the way.
Yeah, sure. So, because we took the kind of the coastal route, and we were on the coast quite a lot of the vegetation was just coastal. It's kind of dunes and like what we would call scrub, but you also then had woodlands that were quite close, and also forests and lots of farmland. And so one of the things that we were surprised by is the farmland in some places in both Portugal and Spain went all the way to the water.
Okay.
And so you were walking on boardwalks sometimes across the farmland with farm animals coming up to you.
Yeah, I was going to say, I suppose in a lot of countries you think, okay, well, the farms might stop 100 or 200 metres away from the water, and then you've got this gap, which is normally park or public access way.
Yeah. No, there was nothing like that. But also it was interesting because what I didn't expect was all the eucalypts. So they had eucalypt forests. So you'd walk through those as well over there.
It's surprising about how far eucalypts have spread around the world. I know we went to South America, and we did some touristing before we started our walk, and you're sitting there looking over, this a couple of thousand hectares of eucalypt forest, and the locals are convinced they're local plants.
Through their little towns and the fishing villages, we also found a lot of grevilleas in the backyards and in the front yards and flowering, and so it was kind of like nice to see that. I should also mention it was quite lush once you started to get into the mountains. It was very green, beautiful.
Okay, that's good. Was there much of a difference between Spain and Portugal, or it was almost like a continuation?
So I'd say it was almost like a continuation, except for the mountains, when you really got into the mountains going into Santiago, and a lot of vineyards, which I don't think we saw many vineyards in Portugal.
Okay. Now, what about animals? Being a very old part of Europe, I can't imagine there was lots of wild animals roaming around. I would expect there to be lots of farm animals, but did you see many wild animals? And I'm guessing probably a lot of birds as well.
Yes, so no, we didn't see any wild animals. A few birds, and so you'd hear the birds as you were walking along, but very friendly domestic animals and farm animals. So donkeys, horses would come up to you, and dogs. They had their favourite spot on the walk, and they'd wait for everybody to come past so they could get a pat. And cats, of course. So yeah, but no, they were the ones that entertained us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, this brings us back to porterage again. You mentioned that you had to have your packs downstairs around about 8 o'clock each morning to travel on to the next destination. you were carrying a day pack. How big is a day pack and roughly how much did it weigh?
So day pack, we tried to actually pack as light as we could. And so our day packs were, they weren't huge. We're probably carrying 6 kilos. Kylie is an avid photographer, so she also had all her photography equipment, so hers was probably 10 kilos or more. But we tried to go light, just kind of water bladder, 2.5 litres, food, snacks, sunscreen, medical kit, all those normal things that you would kind of take, and also kind of gaiters that were waterproof and a big waterproof poncho that covers everything, including your backpack.
I was going to say, did you have much rain at all over the duration of the trip?
We were expecting it, but we only had one day where it was rainy when we were walking, and I think it was on our way into Vigo, and we were fine with what we had. There was one day at the very beginning, it was the second day, where there was a cyclone or a hurricane coming. It was Hurricane Gabrielle, and so we didn't walk in that, and and neither did anybody else. So we found all the other walkers in the hotel or sitting in the bar kind of when you arrived. So we just waited that one out, which was interesting for us because we really wanted to walk, but you couldn't. And so you had a emergency warning out, and your insurance probably wouldn't cover it, and you don't want to put yourself in that position. So it was interesting. That was like our second day that happened.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I suppose that raises a couple of questions, and I will ask you this one while we're here. Insurance, I mean, it is strongly recommended when you're going overseas that you have travel insurance, particularly in the States, because the medical bills can be horrendous. Was insurance readily available, and was it expensive at all?
So it was readily available, and we just got it before we left. Lots of options and less than what I thought.
Yeah.
Particularly because we weren't doing something that was, I think, too risky. Which is good, and we're not too old yet, so that always helped.
I know in the past we've actually done some rock climbing and mountaineering, and that limited where we could get insurance from, and it was a lot more expensive than the stock standard walking insurance.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Now, going back to gear again, what were you wearing in relation to footwear, and were you using things like tracking poles?
So we trained with walking poles, and then I forgot to take them. But in saying that, we didn't need them, and we were quite comfortable not having them. A lot of other people, though, were using them, particularly when they got into the kind of the hills. But we also did a lot of research before we went and realised and talked to a few people, including Joe, that we didn't need hiking boots or anything, and particularly because of the terrain and what we were walking on. So I just actually had my runners, and so they were fine, including up the rocky paths and the boulders and everything. And so that was quite comfortable, and it's what other people had seemed to do. We even saw a woman wearing sandals. So whatever I think is comfortable, and making sure that they're worn in and they're big enough for you to actually not end up with lots of blisters and black toes.
Did you have much problem with blisters at all?
Once. So about 3 or 4 days into the walk, there was a lot of cobblestones we had to walk across, and they were jagged. And once you're on those cobblestones for 3 or 4 hours, my feet were getting very sore, and I realise now that I probably should have taped the sole of my feet. Just to protect them, but I just didn't expect it. So I ended up with some blisters that kind of come up the side of your ankle. So when we finished, we all kind of sat down, and all the other walkers there as well from all different countries, and everyone had their feet up, and quite a few of them had the same problem as I had. We learnt afterwards that a lot of the cyclists call that part of the walk the Portuguese massage. So I won't do that again.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. I must admit, I find that when I'm doing long distance walks, I'll tend to take my feet the first week until they toughen up, and then they're normally right after that. But yeah, certainly you get an area of ground that is a bit hard like that. Yeah, you may have to retape them again at some point.
I should have talked to you before I went, Tim.
Now, accommodation. What were the options for accommodation, and what did you guys end up doing?
So the basic accommodation that Raw Travel booked was really good. So we were really pleased with it, and we already had a bit of intel on that from Joe, who went with them. But what we decided to do was to pay a little bit extra for some of the historical buildings that had been converted into accommodation. So they call them paradors. So we had some wonderful accommodation in converted convents, historical castles. I think once we were in a medieval castle, and also monasteries. And so we were pretty lucky. So for us, the accommodation was excellent and we really enjoyed it. We also paid extra to have separate rooms and to have our own en suites, which isn't, I think, in the normal packages that you buy from some of these type of companies.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I mean, sometimes you might be quite happy sharing accommodation. I certainly do prefer my own bathroom if I can. And I am a snorer, so I don't want to distract other people. But strangely enough, other people's snoring annoys me. So yeah, I think it's probably not a bad way to go to get your own accommodation.
Yeah, I think I'd always do it, particularly like in the afternoons when you needed to have a quick sleep. Yeah, nice to have your own space.
It is. Now, all-important question, what was the food like?
Oh, loved the food. It was excellent. Lots of choices in the larger cities, of course, but all of the accommodation where we stayed was near some good restaurants and cafes, so we were lucky. I would say that, there wasn't much choice in a couple of areas. It was just like whatever the special was when you're in a small kind of fishing village. But it was still fantastic, still really good quality, still fresh, and so we were lucky. And, if you like cheese and like bread and like Serrano ham, you're set.
Yeah. I think I can be quite happy to live on that for 3 weeks.
I should say the wine was great too.
Yeah. No. One thing I've seen on a couple of the Caminos is wine fountains. Did you have any of those?
No, I didn't see that. That sounds like a great idea.
There is, and I can't remember which one it was. There is actually a fountain in the middle of town that's the local winery puts on, and basically you just fill up your bottle with wine. So, yeah, I wasn't too sure if that's a regular thing or just a special for that one particular trip.
Well, we were pretty careful when we were walking the next day. We actually didn't have too much alcohol, maybe a glass, but sometimes not even that. But when we had the days where we were actually sightseeing, then we could actually enjoy the wine and then enjoy the sightseeing and a bit of a sleep in the next day.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. So we've already talked briefly about the start and end of the day, but what was the typical day? So you got up, you dropped your bags off at 8 o'clock, had breakfast. So, but how long did you typically take with breakfast, and what time did you start walking?
Okay, breakfast was so we'd have breakfast at 8 o'clock, and usually that's probably half an hour. Maybe if we're having a cooked breakfast, it would be a bit longer than that, and then go back, clean your teeth, grab your day pack, and check out. So I'd say that we were walking at 9 o'clock or 9:30 every day.
Yeah. And did you, as you said, you were stopping off with a lot of the little cafes along the way, but did you try and stop for lunch at a particular time, or?
So we'd have a look at the route that we were going on the day and work out whether there was a cafe or a little town somewhere, and then kind of try and plan it so you get there and then you eat. But as I think I might have mentioned, that we just carried everything as well. And so we could actually eat when we were hungry, and because we were walking for long periods, made sure that we kind of had a snack every 2 to 3 hours.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. That's good. Now, were any of the meals included as part of the package at all?
So all breakfasts were included.
Yep. Yeah. So lunch, snacks and dinner was up to you guys.
Yeah. And one of the things we would do when we were walking into larger towns is if there was a supermarket, we'd grab a few things for the next day so we could pack lunch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you say pack lunch, what were you typically taking with you?
The staples, bread, Serrano ham and cheese, fruit. And so I was trying to get mandarins and oranges, but also dried fruits, nuts. And in the end, I started, because I was over eating the cheese and the ham, I started taking their kind of small cans of fish and just with me. And so I was getting that protein hit at lunchtime, which was good.
No, that's fair enough. I remember a number of years ago we did a non-adventure holiday in France, and we were driving through France, and we'd stop off at the local service station and get bread and cheese and ham, and that was their junk food, but it was really good food. Now, in relation, you said you was two of you. Were you always walking together, or were you, what was the process? Was it walking together, keeping each other in distance? Did you separate through the day?
So we actually were walking together the whole time. We weren't sure whether that's what we were going to do at the start, but we were just very comfortable. Lucky enough, we get on pretty well, and so we're happy to be silent and just walk. And in the first part of the walk, because you are doing long distances and it's actually on the coast and it's quite flat and there's not a lot of people around, you can actually get into a rhythm. So the two of us were kind of marching almost together, and it's like meditating. And so it was quite a good experience, and we both kind of enjoyed it. We kept together when we got into Spain, and it was a lot busier. But you were with everybody else. And so sometimes we kind of get separated, but kind of make our way back together again. But it was a bit of a push and shove sometimes on the walk, which was quite interesting. But yes, we stayed together and did basically everything together on the walk. Okay.
Now, as far as we've talked about rain, but what were the maximum and minimum temperatures as an average?
So it's mid-20s, I'd say.
Yeah.
In the middle of the day. Sometimes quite warm. One of the things we did watch was if you're on the coastal path, particularly in Portugal, it can get quite warm and quite exposed. There's not a lot of shelter. And so making sure that, we had a bit of variation every now and again, and actually got to walk through some of the woodland walks where we had the choice between the two walks. We noticed there were a lot of people with heat rashes and things too. So even though it was autumn, it was still warm enough for those types of things to happen, and lots of sunscreen for me because I'm very fair.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. You've briefly mentioned people before, but what was the interaction with people like with other hikers and with the locals?
So very good. So everyone was very friendly. It was like we're all doing this together, and so there was a lot of friendly people and wanting to talk and find out where you came from. So we had hikers from everywhere, basically. Lots of British hikers, quite a few Australians, Eastern Europe, Americans, though I should say there were a lot of Canadians. Not all of them might have been Canadians. But it was it was very friendly, and the locals were extremely friendly, particularly in Portugal, to the point that it was almost embarrassing but lovely at the same time, because they'd stop their cars and yell "Bon Camino" and want to talk to you and actually wish you the best. And children in Portugal would all, in school, would all run up to the fence and all call out and wish you a good walk. And so it was a big thing for them. They were very supportive in Portugal. In Spain, we didn't get that happening, but people were still friendly. I just think it was they're probably overwhelmed by how many tourists they've got there. So it was a little bit of a different feel, but they were still very friendly.
Okay. So in relation to the trip itself, what were the key highlights for you?
So I enjoyed the whole trip. I loved the experience. I loved the people that we met. I loved just being able to walk, and the scenery was fantastic. But there were a couple that I just want to mention to you that were our highlights. One was the boat crossing. So going from Portugal into Spain, it was fantastic. We had to, the ferry wasn't working, so we had to get on a small tinny basically and go across. And it was a lot of fun. And it was also the most beautiful scenery. And so it was gorgeous kind of at the top of Portugal, and then going into Spain and walking around. And that walk ended at a place called Agadia, which was a very old fishing village in Spain. And it was fantastic, and we had the best meal that we ate there. we basically got there, walked around, had a look at the whole place. We were staying in a beautiful old convent, and then at dinner time, which is 8:30, 9 o'clock, we kind of hung out and watched where all the locals went. And all of the men in the village all went to one place to eat, and so we kind of went in with them, and it was fantastic. And we had beautiful kind of fish and seafood there, and it was wonderful just to sit and be with the locals. At one point, we were the only tourists there and the only females actually in their place. But it was terrific, and so I remember that. And then I think the last day, because we had really enjoyed the walk. In the last day, as we had decided to walk longer than normal and combine the last 2 days of the walk together, we knew that we had to start early. And we got up and started walking by about 8 o'clock, and it was still dark for quite a while. And we saw the dawn, and we were on our own for a while, and then people would join, and there were a lot of people around, by about mid-morning. And it was a celebration, and so there were people singing to entertain you on the side of the road, and people playing local, instruments and bands, and it was a real celebration. And we were told it was a really hard day, and there's some really tough hills going in, and to be prepared for that. But we didn't even notice the hills by that stage, and we just loved and took in every moment of that walk. And then all of a sudden, we were in the middle of Santiago and walking around and standing in front of that amazing cathedral.
Yeah. It's interesting looking at the movies such as The Way and others like that. It's that church seems to feature heavily, and certainly that's the destination point for pretty much most of the Caminos. So it's interesting to see that. We just don't have that building heritage going back that far in this country that has these amazing old churches. So
yeah, and also I think that it's because it's a religious pilgrimage as well, and so people getting there because they'd walked the way of St. James, and James the Apostle, the Greater, is supposedly buried in that under the cathedral there, and so. It was interesting. So we noticed that there were a lot of religious people there as well, and nuns to kind of greet you. We had a beautiful photo of a nun in blue just walking up a beautiful cobbled street.
It's definitely on my list, and I'd like to do the way of St. James, but there's also a number of the other Caminos I want to do as well. So I think I've got a few of those to do over the coming years.
Well, the one thing that's happening at the moment is everybody seems to be walking, so there's lots of opportunities and lots of walks to do now.
Yeah.
It's quite exciting.
Yeah, no, that's good. What about any negatives? Were there any negatives for you at all?
So I wouldn't say there weren't big negatives, but there were two things. One was that I already mentioned to you, I think the jagged cobblestones and I should have been more prepared, so that was kind of my fault, not the fault of the trip. But there was a very long walk into Vigo one day, which was on pavement basically the whole way, and it was very boring. It was along roads and some major highways and into town, and it was a industrial town, and so you're walking through industrial areas. So that day, if I had something with me where I could actually listen to a podcast, I probably would have done that. But that was a tough day.
Yeah. I suppose when you've got countryside and farms and scenery to look at, as opposed to, as you say, industrial buildings.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what it is these days. So.
Yeah. But overall, we loved the walk, and I'd do it again.
And who would you say the walk is suitable for?
So I would say most people. You need to prepare for it, and I think the fitter you are, the more enjoyable the whole experience. But we saw people of all ages doing the walk, particularly in joining us at the last 100 metres. Last 100 kilometres.
Yeah.
The last 100 kilometres.
And that's apparently, if you want the certificate to say you've done it, you've got to do that last 100 kilometres.
Yeah, that's right. So I would say just prepare. It was a very popular walk with women. So a lot of women were doing what Kylie and I were doing, and so just getting out and walking together in groups. And that was interesting. So from all countries, from 18 all the way through, I think the oldest person we met was about 75 doing it. So a great walk for anybody, really.
Yeah. It sounds like it. And as you said, this was the longest walk you've ever done, and you seem to cope with it quite well. And I think the trick is to not try and do it in 10 days. Take the time, have a bit of a look around and allow your body time to rest as you're going through.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one final question. What's your next great hiking adventure?
So I suspect it's going to be Japan. So I know it's really popular as well, but there's like 3 or 4 walks there that look very interesting, probably shorter, but a lot more mountains and hills. So could be challenging, but also great, again, for understanding a different culture and historical and kind of meeting different people. So we'll probably do something like that.
Okay, that's good. So we've been talking with Mary Wiley-Smith about hiking the Portuguese Coastal Trail. Mary, thanks for taking the time to fill us in about this Camino option.
Thanks, Tim. Happy to share. It was a wonderful trip and I'd recommend it.
So that was our interview with Mary on the Portuguese Coastal Way, which, as I mentioned at the start of this podcast, it's a section of the Portuguese Camino, the full one. So rather than being the 625 kilometres, it's been shortened back to 260 kilometres. There are so many Caminos, and it's a matter of if you can only do one, it's probably going to take you half a year to work out which one it is because there's just so much choice. A number of episodes, Jill and I did a bucket list series, both for international and domestic bucket list, and there are Caminos on that list, and this is another one that's also going on that list as well. We are planning on doing the Way of St. James, the Camino Francis, not in 2026, but in 2027 is when we're initially planning, and I think I'm going to have to start scheduling some of the others in every second year or so after that. So there was a couple of things that came up in that episode which I hadn't really thought of to a great extent, but do make sense. So you're going to a foreign country, and Australians and second languages aren't really high on the list of priorities, whereas a lot of Europeans will speak 2 or 3 or 4 languages just because they're in such close proximity to a number of different countries. But Mary was saying that the language wasn't really a barrier either in Spain or in Portugal in particular. And even when they did have a few awkward interactions, they drag out Google Translate, and that works really well. And I just really hadn't thought about it because I've never had to use that in the past. The other thing that Mary mentioned was she had one section of old Roman road. And again, we're talking about roads that are 2,000 odd years old. And she said there was one section that was really rough and jagged, and she was ending up getting blisters and very sore feet. Now, she did say that everyone was pretty much wearing trail runners or sneakers of some type. It wasn't really necessary to wear boots, but it sounded like on that one section, boots may have been useful. Or the other thing which a lot of people tend not to think about is there are trail runners and there are trail runners. And there are some trail runners that have what's classed as a rock plate, which is basically either a carbon fibre material or something similar, sandwiched in between a couple of layers of the sole. So it means if you do get really hard, harsh rock that's pointy and sharp, it's not coming through even fairly thick rubber and impacting on your feet. So it sounds like a footwear with a rock plate on this particular trail is probably worthwhile. Animal-wise, again, this is Europe. Europe's, I must admit, when we did the episode on the Via Transylvanica, and they said they had bears there, this is probably one of the rare countries that do still have a lot of wilderness, and you do get native animals cropping up as opposed to just farm animals. But not unexpectedly for Spain and Portugal, the animal life was really farm animals, and that was about it. So we are really lucky in Australia to have the wildlife we do, and we just tend to take it for granted. Insurance, now again, this is something I often don't tend to think about when we do these interviews, but it was a question I thought it's worthwhile asking. If you're going to the United States, you really do need travel insurance because unless you have a specific travel insurance or your Australian policy specifically covers you for overseas travel, and usually they don't. If you have an accident overseas, in the States, you're going to have to pay for it, and it can be quite expensive. In the Europe, it's probably not as bad, but I always do make it a habit of getting insurance. It's relatively cheap, and it's just a bit of peace of mind. The last thing you want to do is have an accident and end up in hospital and have to start worrying about how you're going to pay for it. Mary was saying that they had their luggage sent on each day, and this sounds like a trip you could either carry everything yourself and walk it through, or else you do get it sent on. And it didn't sound like it was that expensive as an overall trip process. But it means that you're carrying a day pack, you're carrying what you need for the day. The only disadvantage of getting your luggage sent on is it means it's gone to your hotel where you're going to be staying the next night. And if you're having a hard day, you've got no choice but to get there. Or if you're having a really easy day and you turn up at lunchtime because you're traveling so much faster than you thought, it means that you are a bit more limited with how you go through and do things. But certainly the travel company that Mary used, they do a lot of this sort of stuff. They're able to make the recommendations. She was saying that when they booked their trip, they were asked questions like how long a distance are you comfortable walking, and what's your walking experience and all that sort of stuff. So it means they can cater for someone. If someone says, "Look, I'm happy to walk 30 kilometres a day, and that's what I want to do," they will actually build a trip on that basis. But having said that, Mary did say they did allow some additional days off in between, just to allow them a bit of fitness, and in case they're having fitness issues, they have a bit of a rest. But also they want to go and look at some of the touristy stuff. And it's the sort of thing that this is one of these sort of locations where if you're walking through these towns, you may never get back there again. So it's worthwhile having a day off here and there just to take advantage of a culture that we don't see that often unless you're going over there on a regular basis. Still on the accommodation basis, she was saying that they up the accommodation. Certainly it sounds like you can pick and choose which level you want to be at, but they picked single rooms with their own en suites. And I must admit, you get to a stage, particularly as you get older, or if you're a couple and want a bit more privacy, a shared accommodation where you've got shared toilet facilities, that's fine if you don't mind that. I've gotten to the stage where I've gotten old enough there. I don't particularly want to share rooms with other people, and I prefer to have my own bathroom facilities as well. I asked her why she chose the time of the year to go, and she said she picked autumn for a couple of reasons. One, the temperature was a bit cooler, and she said during the daytime they were having temperatures around about mid-20s, so that's fine. Whereas if you're going in July and midsummer, you're going to be getting a lot more hotter temperatures. The other thing is also the number of people on trail. You're not just getting the international tourists doing a lot of these sort of trails, you're also getting the locals who will take a lot of their holidays during summertime. If it's a holy year as well, the numbers can increase by up to 400%, and it becomes really busy, particularly that last 100 kilometres. And Mary did say they got to a point where they cut in and all of a sudden there were people everywhere and it was really busy. So I must admit, when I'm looking at doing the Camino Frances, we are looking at doing it in autumn as well for those particular reasons. So it sounds like autumn is a good time to do any of them, but you don't want to make it so late, particularly if you're going to be going or impacted by potential snow in some areas. She was saying that the locals, particularly those in Portugal, were really friendly. They would pull the car over, say Bon Camino, which is basically have a good walk, and ask them about how they're going and how you're enjoying it. And it's good to see that the locals are so invested in the walks that go through their country, through the culture that's associated with it. And she was saying that Spain, they were still friendly, but not as friendly as Portugal. But Spain is getting blasted by a huge number of tourists, and I think they just like to sort of keep to themselves. But they're still very friendly. So it sounds like a great trip. And I think that reinforced when I asked her what her highlights were. She was saying that the people, both the hikers on trail and the locals, were one of the real highlights. So this sounds like another great walk, which, as I said, has gone on our bucket lists. And I think it's one of these sort of things where I think, do you do the main Camino, which is roughly 800 odd kilometres, and then go and do this one, which is another 260. So you add a couple of weeks on the end of it. I mean, while you're there and you've already paid for the airfares, you may as well just go through and get the benefit of being there at the same time, particularly when you've got to travel from overseas. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed finding out a bit about this lesser-known Camino. It really does sound great, and I really am looking forward to it. That's all for this episode. We hope you've enjoyed. That's all for me. Bye for now.